I remember learning how to fake a smile. And I remember a little bookshelf when I was a little kid thinking, this is going to get you in a lot of trouble. You're going to have to undo this one day.
I think the goal for all of us is to be able to fully be present in the moment and experience all facets of that connection with your partner and not have it be dulled in any way.
Honest, intimate, vulnerable, authentic communication. The power not only to create intimacy, but the power as a litmus test to let you know who you don't want to create intimacy with.
In my previous marriage, I was starting to pick up that I was not satisfied. And then it was just during my relationship with him and his love and his kindness and his safety that he provided in return and his vulnerability about talking about his trauma and his stuff that gave my mind permission to start unwinding to me, even to myself.
Welcome back to Flipping the Lid. Today we're doing something a little bit different. You see both Ashley and I here on screen. It's because we had another couple come into our lives that we could have interviewed either one of them independently. Their stories independently are unbelievable. We're going to unpack them today. But what's really cool is their stories became even more powerful once they met each other. And the way they're choosing to live life and how they're fostering intimacy within each other, as well as helping so many other people overcome trauma, move energy through their bodies, and connect more deeply with themselves and those that they care about. These two are dynamite, and I can't wait to jump in today. That's why Ashley's here with me, because I'm not sure I could have handled both all by myself, because there's so much wisdom about to come through. So Marshall and Heather, we are so excited to have you here today.
We're happy to be back. Brian, I love my time with you, like we said before we started, so we're happy to be back.
I love that. So there's only one question that I ask every guest, and there's only been one other show where there was two guests on the same episode. So you guys can decide, how do you want to answer this as individuals or collectively? It's up to you. I gave a very brief description on who you are, but I'd love for you to tell us who you are in your words.
You want to do it? Hey, you want to do it together or separately?
I don't know. This question is one question that we both go, who are we? What?
I once had an interview at QVC. This is a long time ago, Brian. And I did really well. I sold a paperclip. I was way up, and it was one interview left. And they said, tell us about yourself. It's a tricky thing, because the tendency is for people to say, what do you do? Right? But who do I be? Which is what I want to share with you. I'm a person who believes with complete faith, steadfastly, in the power of honest, intimate, vulnerable, authentic communication. The power not only to create intimacy, but the power as a litmus test to let you know who you don't want to create intimacy with, depending how it's received and depending on how the subsequent interactions are. So that's me. And I'm a person who for sure could only have realized this fulfillment in my life because of the human being sitting next to me.
So we answered collectively.
That's it.
That ditto for you?
Yes.
Okay.
It's what it started to feel like there. I love the framing of those four words that you used in terms of fostering relationships and connection. And ultimately what they all tied together with was this singular word, intimacy. Right? Mm-hmm. Who do you want to be intimate with? How do you have the signals to understand when intimacy is appropriate? But I think before we get into more questions around intimacy and the two of you, help us understand, what is your definition of intimacy and how do you see it show up in relationships, romantic and not?
That's a good question.
We have the old chestnut, into me you see. We have literally nothing kept from each other. There was something I had that could be reflected medically that I knew I would keep from her for a couple of days till I let her know that I was okay. But we have no secrets from each other, none. So intimacy means you could put energetically your hand right through the space between us. There is no matter.
Clear channel.
Clear channel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and I appreciate that when it shows up in friendships or family and stuff as well. But yeah, a clear channel and closeness, honesty.
Yeah.
One of the things we did right up front was tell each other our complete sexual history, for example. You and I both know, Brian, and Ashley, I assume you know too, How many couples don't do that with each other? You know, it's too much triggering, too many emotions. Hey, emotions are like crayons in a crayon box. You have to pull them all out at some point or another.
And not just share your history, but also unpack the history. Like, what was this like for you? What was this like for you to listen to? And just go back and forth with it and really give you all the details.
That's beautiful. If you two haven't already, I think you would get great joy out of listening to the very first episode of this show, because it was Ashley and I doing just that about our story. And
no, I have not heard that.
Yeah. So again, today's about you, not about us. But I think you would quite enjoy that, because we completely align. And I will tell you that it wasn't always that way. Right. There are things about our past, about our history. And I love the fact that you use the word unpack. It's actually the title of our third pillar of our whole framework and concept. Unpacking is where truly we feel for the purpose of healing. We understand context, perspective, like depth. We understand the source and sources of the ways that we are getting triggered and what we call our trash from our past and what's causing us to trip on it. Right. But Ashley and I have been together for 17 years, coming up here in just like a week or two. But I always say that we hid from each other for 14, and she's only felt emotionally safe with me for about 18 months.
Interesting. Is that you agree with that timeline, Ashley?
Yeah, I feel like, maybe it's starting to be longer than that now. I think we're really building something. So it's been an interesting journey, because I would tell you that I never thought or believed necessarily that it would be possible for us to be where we are today, when, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I wouldn't have guessed that. So it's been a very big transformation.
Do you mind me asking you a question, Brian, of Ashley?
Go for it. Again, this can be as conversational as you want. I love to interview and feature you, but of course, we're here for dialogue.
Was there a moment where you started to feel more safe? Is there an event? Like, when did the safety start to occur?
There was a conversation between us that occurred that I feel like inspired complete ownership in a new way with Brian that I hadn't seen or felt before. And it was so authentic and so real that I knew something was shifting and changing. And it's like a new door opened for us in that moment.
Did you tell him right away, or did it take time to communicate that?
I think I did. I felt like it was important for him to know that key aspect of taking ownership and really listening and hearing me was pivotal. I mean, nothing would have changed if it weren't for that.
And I understand for context for both of you to understand as well. I mean, so both Ashley and I would tell you, probably the only reason we've lasted as long as we have is our level of communication. And what I would argue has been our level of transparency and authenticity all throughout our relationship. So when I say we hid from each other for 14 years, that was not a conscious, intentional holdback, right? Like, we were always very forthcoming with sexual partners, prior sexual partners, how our relationships evolved, where and how we were evolving. But what started to happen in terms of the hiding was because I grew up in a house where there was one right way to do everything. As a result of my accident, I really believed from very early on, because people would ask me all the time what happened, and I'd look at them and tell them exactly what happened, and then they'd turn to my parents for validation, right? Which told me that they weren't believing my truth, right? I wasn't feeling safety and protection in those moments. And so there was a whole lot of armor protecting a lot of pain and trash that I didn't know existed for me for a long time. And when I shut off physical pain because it exceeded my ability to cope, I shut off mental pain, emotional pain, and spiritual pain for 20, 25 years and didn't know it. And so I was in this path of recovery, but the 3-year ago turn was, I think that for the very first time, I was able to see, understand, and accept that I was dealing with anger that I didn't even know existed. And 99% of my world didn't know that I was an angry person. In fact, when I started taking ownership for it, they're like, what? You? Right? But I've got a huge personality. I have a ton of energy. And the reality of it is I have a gift to pour life into people and pull their potential out of them, right? And help them overcome things in pain. But you put all of that same delivery shifted on the negative side, and damage gets created at a level that, like, I truly didn't even understand. And so what it took for me, and this is probably how dense and dumb I am in different areas of life. I've joked about this because it's like, I almost need to be like rattled to the edge of death just to feel alive, right? My idea of suffering is a life without my wife and my kids because it's the only thing binary in my world. And I went from believing I was in the best place in my marriage that I'd ever been to not knowing if I'd be married for another 30 days. To me, there was no other option, right? Other than to have full surrender, full ownership, and full acceptance in that moment, and recognizing that I'm human. I'm going to screw it up again. But I made a promise to her that day, and I'm proud to say that that promise was largely fulfilled with a handful of a couple of situations that weren't overly damaging, and we worked ourselves through. Now, I just was leaving a voice note this morning to one of my coaches, and I was just saying it's really beautiful, like where Ashley and I have gotten to. Like, we have much more lightness, much more laughter, much more connection, much more trust. And because of the work we've done in these last 3 years, which we'd been doing for 14 years before, but we really went deep in this window in a way that we hadn't, it's unlocked our ability to see each other, understand each other, connect at a deep level, have intimacy in ways that are not just sexual. And it's also improved our sexual connection, right? Like, all of these benefits have come from this concept of emotional safety, up to and including she had zero desire to be in our business or any of our entrepreneurial businesses until she felt emotional safety in the home.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, I want to comment because Heather and I, similarly, like, I blocked out sexual trauma twice, 2 different times in my life. Not the same trauma, but I blocked it out 2 different times. I blocked out gaslighting. And when we talk about emotional intimacy, and I'm talking to your listeners right now.
Yeah.
When we talk, and your viewers, when we talk about emotional intimacy, we're not only talking about how happy we are and how joyous we are. Pain matters. If you're uncomfortable, let's say somebody's stepping on your foot. If you can't say, ow, well, you're in big trouble. Your foot's going to start really, really getting impacted. You have to be able to communicate these other colors of the rainbow, the crayons that you might not typically want to pull out of your crayon box because people said, maybe like you, Brian, I don't know what caused you to block it out. Don't worry about it. Cheer up. You know, whatever caused the people to look at your parents for validation instead of you, we suddenly are shadows of ourselves.
Yep.
We're like representations, holograms versus a real functioning human being.
It's all true.
Yeah. And the same becomes true in a relationship. I know for me, especially towards the time that it got closer to that breaking point where I just was like, blah, this is where I am. And it was completely unexpected, I think, from Brian's point of view. But when you feel like you're living a parallel life with somebody, but you're viewing things that they can't see, and it's almost like, you start thinking, I can't make them see. So unless the clarity comes, there's no way for us to even really communicate about this, because it's like I'm experiencing something that he's completely blind to. And so what does that do for the person experiencing it? You just learn to be quiet, because if the other person can't see it and can't validate it, then what's the point, right?
Absolutely. There was a potential client who ended up not being a client. I did the intro session with them, and one of the people was perfectly polite, perfectly respectful, but I could feel the rage. And at some point he criticized, and now I'm revealing it's he, but he criticized her for being selfish. He literally said to me on the call, she's selfish. And I said, well, in a healing situation like this, it's important that everybody be selfish to a degree. Mm-hmm. And I could feel him getting angrier and angrier, which I thought was interesting. So you're right. Unless people see it, and sure enough, they're not going to be my clients. Not because of her choice, but because of his. If you're not willing to see these things, if you're focus on maintaining your blind spots, and I speak to myself too. If I were to focus on maintaining my blind spots, I'd be screwed. I'd probably be dead.
Couldn't agree with you more. I mean, one of the things I say often is that the unavoidable precursor to change is acceptance, right? Until we accept the current state of things, we cannot alter them. And I also love even what you just said about that anecdote about a potential client, and your clarity and boundaries for the types of people that you're going to be willing to invest your time and energy into working with, right? I mean, one of the big clarifying elements that we say in our world is if somebody doesn't have the desire or the courage to stand in their truth, they're not ready to be in our world.
100%, Brian. This is one of those comments that you made the first time I met up with you, and I'm like, I like this guy. So
yeah. Well, I love the way you framed the 4 words as we started, right? Honesty, vulnerability, curiosity, and conversations. You referenced these as a truth-empowered relationship, where we just talked about this concept of truth. So I'd love it if you could define what is a truth-empowered relationship, because I can make my own assumptions based on the conversation we've already had, but I'd love to hear the clarity from both of you. And then I know that you both have expressed that your own relationship, though it likely saved both of you in many respects, also had some of its own tumultuous times. So take us back to one of the first moments of really struggle and resistance and help us understand, how did you identify it and work through it?
Okay, so let me add to the first part first about truth-empowered relationships, and will you remember the... Okay, because we got lots to share there. Miraculous stuff. Truth-empowered relationships, the concept, and I'm going to guess it's not that different than what your intention is for your clients. In fact, I think we might have talked about this. The intention is to create a safe space to make each person in the relationship their own and their partner's healer. That's one part best friend, one part therapist, one part coach, and if in case of an intimate relationship, one part intimate partner. And we also have pillars. The 4 pillars are the same as the 4 pillars for clinical ethics, a clinically ethical, doctor-patient relationship, which are autonomy, which is each person is, well, I don't have to define it for you, I see you nodding, but each person is responsible for their own reality, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and actions. 2 is beneficence, which, if you want to look at it like the short version of the Bible, which is do unto others as you would have done unto you, right? That's beneficence. Non-maleficence, which is more of an Old Testament, what you would not have done unto yourself, do not do unto others. And the 4th one is justice. And in the case of a relationship, it's fairness. And I'm going to guess most of your clients come to you saying, geez, I wish we had a third party, a referee. I think everybody in a relationship at some point wishes, oh my gosh, I wish this were being recorded. I wish there were a referee here. I wish someone could hear that. You know, we get frustrated. We want our reality to be valid.
I'm going to start recording what you say.
Exactly. So the idea being we're here to support each other's reality, ourselves and the other person. So that's the short version. Now I want to answer, because you said we were brief on time. I want to answer the second part of your question. But if you ever have questions, go ahead and interrupt. Is that fair?
Beautiful. Love it.
Okay. So the second part was tough times. You want to speak to that?
Well, I mean,
I'm doing all the talking. So it's got,
you're so good at it.
Well,
So
that's what Ashley always says as well. And I just want to say that I can see already that he is literally getting credit for what's only 50% his in some cases, in many cases, because your brilliance and warmth shines through as well. So she's always quieting her voice as well. And I just want to say, my dear, he does have beautiful words, but yours are just as powerful.
No, well, thank you. My brain is confused by that, but I appreciate and I accept it. So the tumultuous times. Did I say that word right?
yeah.
Yes.
You nailed it.
I grew up in a gaslighting home, and so I picked up on those tactics. So that's the one I want to talk about. I was gaslighting myself to the point where I forgot that I was doing it, and then I was in turn doing it to him, and that caused many situations. And
could you give an example of how that showed up in your relationship?
I would love that.
Yeah, let me think about this. So would it be like if I were saying something to Wesley? Those are
A lot of it was in parenting. A lot of it would show up in parenting.
So I would have ordinary conversations with our son about things that you need to talk to kids about. But she never got to stand up for herself as a child. So suddenly I was the mean stepfather and she was the child who was getting or hearing things that they didn't want to hear, which wasn't accurate to the situation. But so she would come at me hard. I mean, verbally, but it was intense. And she would try to convince me that it wasn't her, it was me. Mm-hmm. And holding on to my sanity in those moments, because I also experienced gaslighting in my life. For decades, I let it confuse me more and more until the pain of living in the delusion became greater than the pain of speaking up for the truth. So I was able, our bond of love is strong. So I was able to maintain it through that. I would say I was ineffective when I would do things like this, Brian and Ashley. I would do like, do you see what you're doing right now? Do you see? Not helpful. Not helpful.
I have also found that those words don't typically help. I've tried that same approach. It doesn't land very well.
No, it doesn't land well.
It made it so much worse because when I was a kid, that's what my parents would do. You're doing this behavior, and that's why we're and I wasn't able to seek understanding. So I built up this wall inside against being told what and who I was and how I was behaving. And so I would just get inflamed and stop telling me about myself. And so I would project onto you, and then I would try to tell you it was you. Yeah, you're right.
Now, her version of what the moment was, I asked you actually what your moment was. Her version of what the moment was might be different than mine. What occurs to me to share was she was having a freak out moment, and I was in the bed, and she was in her closet.
Right.
And I was able to discern based on, it was a sense, an intuitive sense, based on the read of her energy, what her soul's question was. And I said it to her. And she immediately realized, oh my gosh, that's the soul's question that I've been unconsciously screaming for decades. So, yeah.
I want to get a nerve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was probably like the first moment I felt piercingly seen.
Ew. Describe what that felt like.
So it's as if throughout my childhood, I built a maze, a wall, puzzles, every sort of defense mechanism I could think of. And what that did was protect me, but it also made me so very lonely and isolated from connection. And that moment actually was not early on in our relationship, but the interactions we had throughout the beginning of our relationship, they were like breaking down the walls a little bit, helping me realize that I had built this maze and isolated myself off. And that moment felt like all those little cracks that had been made previously shattered away.
Yeah.
And now I could really start doing the work. Now I could really start seeing myself and sharing myself and being honest with myself even more, and finally coming out and breaking out of the maze and the defense mechanisms and the projecting and the gaslighting.
And all I will add to that is that though her soul's question, unless she wants to share it, I'll keep that private. I will tell you, I could tell that from her energy and her facial features, I could see that her question was, isn't this what begging for mercy looks like? Am I not doing begging for mercy right? And I must add, so that no one would be confused, again, she was in her closet, I was on the bed. We weren't having any interaction that would require that expression of emotion. But I identified it and said it out loud, and she realized she'd been screaming. It validated for me, not that I had any question. I know the environment that she grew up in. It validated for me all the stories she had told of asking people to stop, and her boundaries got stepped on in pretty hideous ways.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's a few key things that jump out through that. Really powerful. And thank you, Heather, for your willingness to jump into that and your vulnerability and sharing it. It's unfortunately not an uncommon descriptor for how many people have experienced the walls they've created in their lives and the traps and the mazes that they've created for themselves. And, you know, we talk often about this concept of the second you protect yourself, you actually guarantee you're going to disconnect yourself from who you are and what you want. And every once in a while, right, we're given this gift where someone outside of ourselves, in this case, in both of our cases, right, it was an intimate partner, a partner in life, a lover, who saw us in a way that we didn't see ourselves in that moment, and then gave us permission to live into it. And what you just said a second ago, Marshall, about like, I could identify it and I could put words to it, hits on one of the key areas where I believe people suffer, right? I think people suffer in 4 places: the things that are left unsaid, the things we lack permission to feel or say, the things we lack the words to articulate or understand, or the things that are left undone. And so often, by not only sharing our own truth, do we alleviate by acting, doing our own internal suffering, by putting the truth into the world. It really does, right? That old adage of the truth will set you free is real, okay? But someone outside of ourselves communicating either their truth or what they see in us will give us permission to feel and say things that we wouldn't otherwise have, and words to understand and articulate them in a unique way. And so really in that moment, all you did was reflect back truth and what you felt and had observation of in the moment. And Heather, you took that alley-oop and you slam dunked it sounds like, by opening up so many new opportunities to understand yourself at a deeper level. I do find it interesting, though, that sometimes we need that external push and validation to actually give ourselves permission to explore ourselves internally. And so as it relates to working with each other and with so many other people and relationships, how do you help foster that environment so that everyone can be seen and everyone has permission to start doing the deeper work sooner than maybe they think they're ready?
Well, the first thing I want to say is, like, had I coached myself on that, we all have the potential for a highly developed intuition. But I spent 10 years, I should say, and I spent 10 years in a personal growth environment, a community where we had committed to tell the truth to each other. So I was able to learn to distinguish between my intuition and a story in my head. So that's why I said it the way I did. But if I were to coach someone, in answer to your question, I would certainly coach them to say, I sense this, not you're this.
Yep.
I sense this. I didn't. We have a strong bond and it survived it. But I think that's part of what creating that safety for people to do sooner rather than later. I know I've done that to people just going through life, and I'll run into somebody, you said something to me 15 years ago and blah, 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 blah. And I try to communicate in that way. You know, it seems to me, I sense, versus what we are perceiving is some sort of fact, is solid.
I think that's beautiful in the way you described that. I really do. And Marshall, you and I continue to have deeper and deeper alignment. I would tell you that almost always before I give feedback, I ask permission, right? Just to even frame the space. And then second, I always give the caveat. It's like, look, I'm getting the sense, I'm seeing some things, I'm picking up on some stuff related to your energy. However, I don't care about being right. I care about getting it right. And so what I would just ask is that anything that I share with you, if it doesn't land, push back right away.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because I don't want to be here to determine and tell you what your truth is. I just hopefully highlight some opportunity that maybe you haven't explored yet.
Right. And just the guess, when you say I sense of it, is an invitation. It's an invitation for what you said. Things that are that we don't feel safe sharing to other people. That was number 2 of the list. I agree. That's, oh, wow. Did you see those
new reactions on Apple? I'm assuming you guys are on a webcam on your computer. Yeah, there's this new reaction with the new update, and it's starting to come through on all Zooms and Riverside. So I actually like it because if we're getting those thumbs ups and some balloons, we're celebrating.
Did it work?
Yeah, I don't know. See, like now the one time you try to do it, it doesn't work.
Right.
Right. Isn't that weird? Oh, well.
I actually have a question. Okay. If we shift into the topic of physical intimacy for a few minutes, I know for me personally, it's a very complicated area and one that I inherently am not comfortable discussing. So I'm trying to push myself more to talk about physical intimacy, both with Brian and just in general, because I think for a lot of us, just the way that we were raised is primarily where a lot of that hesitancy comes from. And I think for me in my family, my role, and even my role now as a mom and business partner, and just how I view myself, I tend to put a ton of pressure on myself. And I like to see myself as the person that holds things together. And I, until recently, I probably wouldn't have admitted that it comes from a place of control, but obviously it does. Like I can't pretend that it doesn't anymore. Because for me, if I'm in control, that means safety. And so that notion definitely has carried over into our relationship and into our physical intimacy. And I think for a long time, when things weren't good and when I didn't feel safe, it was easier to just not have intimacy because, if you're not communicating emotionally and you're not feeling that depth, for me, it was just another way to protect. And so now we're in this like beautiful place emotionally in our family, with our business. And I find for me that that's still an area that I can't let go. And I realize that especially with physical intimacy, it has to do with control. But then I also am realizing that it's connected to the physical sensation and how sometimes that can trigger a feeling of not having control. And understanding, like feeling, I think just like, well, then that must be a bad thing, right? Because anytime I feel out of control, for me, that's a negative. And what's funny about that is for a lot of people, feeling out of control is a feeling that they seek, and for me, it's something that I push away. And so I guess my question would be for someone who is like me, who is trying to push the boundaries of what they're comfortable with, but also like find self-acceptance. I mean, it's so complicated. There's so many pieces to it. But I guess like what would be a good first step in kind of like relinquishing that feeling of control and even desensitizing yourself in a way while sensitizing yourself to the experience, if that makes any sense.
She's the perfect person to talk to. She has a lot of wisdom here. Go ahead. About the thing
that face. She's like, no, I don't want to talk about it. Come on.
Hey.
Well, not when you put me on the spot. No,
we're both.
No.
I should say we're both survivors of sexual trauma too. So what she's going to tell you about is incredibly helpful because there's a tendency to control when you survived a sexual trauma. So this should help. Go ahead.
I've shared this story before, and I always like to say, slow down. When you're talking about physical intimacy and you're engaging in physical intimacy, you got to slow down. Don't put pressure on yourself to get to somewhere. So you just got to follow that energy. And sometimes the energy takes you into, oh gosh, now here comes the relinquishing control. Relinquishing. Okay, control. So once you get to that spot, slow down and talk about it. That's where you're at. That's where your physical intimacy is in that moment.
Can you give them the example?
That's where I was going.
Okay.
So we had to slow down. When we first started being physical, I thought, I don't have any issues. I'm totally okay in this area. I'll just be support for you and no big deal. And that was fine because he had a lot that I could contribute to. But as we really started becoming consistently intimate, I started realizing I'm having things that are being unsaid, and I'm not giving myself permission to exist within this. And okay, now I really do need to work through things. So we needed to slow it down, way, way down. And it got to a point where, like, if he would touch my breast, I would feel angry. And so we had to slow down and I had to tell him, I feel angry when you touch me there. I actually feel like punching you in the face. And so we would unpack that. Where does that come from? What does this remind you of? And so it would go back to childhood for something. Yep. And then he would take a turn in talking about his reaction to that and what it feels like to have me not want him to touch me there. And then it would turn into, okay, will you touch me there while I feel angry?
And then you can talk about it.
And then we can talk about it while he's touching me. So I'm embodying that emotion and I'm feeling it. And, the feeling to heal, you got to go through it. So I'm sitting with the anger, I'm sitting with it, and I'm talking about it. And then the next time I get there and I'm like, I don't feel the anger anymore. It takes a few times, of course, but...
She's skipping one part, which is a magical part, which is where everything she said, and she was like, and don't worry, we're going to get through this. And on the other side, I'm going to want like she's reassuring me as all this stuff is happening, which is really sweet.
Well, I mean, it is really sweet. It also goes to show how much you have prioritized other people over yourself in the past, Heather, and wanting to ensure that, right, like even your own existence is almost pale compared to whatever his experience is going to be. And so I think there's lots of dynamics that are wrapped up in that, because that's a beautiful part of just relationships as well, right? And how do we support each other, and how do we allow each other to empower the areas where we typically might default or defer? And I think that the proactive nature of it, by the way, is beautiful, because guess what? That's like the biggest thing that most males would associate with their inability to touch their partner or to explore and do certain things, right? It feels like abandonment, like I'm being shut down, like I'm not going to be good enough. I must not know how to make the right moves on her, right? Oh man, I don't know how to turn on my wife or my partner. And it's like all these things create these subliminal non-truths, but communicating in every capacity always, I believe, is what can diffuse it. And you guys just demonstrated that.
I love how, Heather, you described like not, thinking that it was just like his issue that you guys were going to work through. Because I mean, when I was in my early 20s, you've got like wild hormones raging through your body. I was in college, there's alcohol. Like I never thought that I had any reservations or issues with sexual intimacy. But then realizing too, a lot of that wasn't real intimacy anyway, and kind of like the disconnection from your body that can take place when substances are, used at the same time. And so it's completely different when you are working through those types of feelings with a partner, and you're realizing, even people who are, used to drinking before having sex, or whatever it might be, just the things that we do to desensitize ourselves to make the experience more enjoyable. And I think the goal for all of us, right, is to be able to fully be present in the moment and experience all facets of that connection with your partner and not have it be dulled in any way. And so I just think that a lot of the shame comes from the expectation of like, it shouldn't be this difficult. But then the more we discuss it and you talk about it, you realize like, no, like the majority of people deal with things just like this, and even if the source is different, a lot of the feelings, the emotions, the steps we have to take for the healing are going to look exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Outside of coaching, I was, I waited a long time to find her, and I had a lot of partners, and everyone has something going on. Everyone has something. For sure.
Yeah. And I think, what's interesting, I mean, we say this as it relates to kind of any type of trauma, right? There's that tendency to want to compare and minimize, whether it's a big T or a little T trauma. And it doesn't, like, at the end of the day, if it had an impact, caused you to stop, caused a changing or rewiring of your emotional or intellectual narratives, if it challenged the way your physical experience was in relation to what you believed it was, those are all traumas, right? And and again, so like it doesn't really matter where they are on the scale. It's to acknowledge that it's there and to start to work through it. You both are obviously very vulnerable and open about the fact that you both are, on the receiving side of being a victim of sexual trauma in particular. And so if we can spend just a few minutes there, I think that this is an area, again, regardless of how we associate that trauma, I'd love to know your experience. Obviously, you don't have to tell us what happened, but what did those situations cause you both to evolve in terms of your thinking and your emotions? And when were you able to identify the damage existed so that you could begin repair?
Okay. Do you mind if I go first? My trauma happened when I was young. It was my paternal grandmother. It happened to my father too. And when I came home, all I could say, because I was very young, was, Daddy, I feel sad. Again, you don't have the words to articulate, like you said, Brian. And what he said back was, son, don't be sad. There are people in wheelchairs. Now, decades after that, when I would see someone in a wheelchair, my penis would hurt, because the body and
of course, it's all connected.
It's all connected. And that when that autonomic nervous system gets compromised, it's still waiting to be healed. It's still waiting to be recalibrated. So these kind of, and I didn't know how to deal with this stuff, so I blocked it out, remembered it in my early 30s, blocked it out again. And what the manifestations, then there was something else that happened, which I've only shared with maybe 15 people, but it was a secret I was burdened with by my father, which added to the confusion. And the result was that I felt like just having desire for a woman made me a predator. It was very difficult to feel, and it's not something I'm completely divested of. Just the act of desire means I want something from you. What if you don't want it at the same time? What if you don't want it at all? Have I become a predator just by the mere fact that I want you? So this is a question I've been working with. And by the way, it's interesting because I had a reaction when you said victim. But in the moment it happens, as much as we want to say survivors, we are victims in that moment.
In the moment. And I'm happy you picked up on the specificity of that moment, because neither one of you are victims in the way that you've chosen to respond. But
in the moment, something's happening we don't want to have happen.
That's something you selected to happen to you. It happened to you. And yes, you were a victim in the moment. Now, remaining in victimhood versus not, that's a choice.
Right. It's not always an easy choice, but it's a choice that people can make. Anyone can make.
And to your point exactly, though, I will tell you that this is one of the greatest lessons my father, and this is one of the gifts he gave me. One of the greatest lessons was always this: no matter what, never fails, in every situation guaranteed, we always have a minimum of two choices. And to date, I've been not able to find a situation where that doesn't become true. Now, they both might be shitty choices. You could be held up at gunpoint, and your choice is to hand over all of your worldly possessions or get shot, right? They both suck. But it's still within our ability to choose and regain that ownership that growth happens, I believe.
Yes. Right. And I'll tell you something else, Brian. If you are ever with someone who has had some sort of trauma and is having a panic attack, a PTSD moment, give them choices.
Yeah.
Give them choice. Do you want to lay down or stay or sit up? I'll lay down. Do you want the curtains open or closed? Closed. Do you want the light on or off?
Yeah.
You give them a series of choices. Suddenly I regain my control over the situation. And I have goosebumps as I say it. So that's a little life hack for your listeners,
Yeah, no, I mean, that's extremely powerful. And I love also that you said, it's not something that's completely gone, right? I believe that many of these things, many of our traumas will be adversaries until the day we die. Right? We have to be vigilant in our efforts to continue to maintain our awareness, our ownership, and we get triggered less and less and less, right? It goes from existing in them for long periods of time into minutes and moments. But I think that that's also a misnomer, that most people just believe that it's just going to go away, right? And so I'm really grateful that you said that. Heather, I would love to hear your answer to that prior question as well, because I think from a female's perspective, I want to understand your truth.
So mine happened when I was very young as well. I blocked out a lot. I really can't remember who. I have, bursts of memories of it happening, but I don't have the face. I have an idea of who. But what it created in me is a lot of confusion around play, around platonic relationships, around connection in general, around do I want this? Is this the type of play that I want to participate in? And then it manifested also in I can't pinpoint the term. I became
hyper-vigilant?
No, well, that was from other trauma. I laugh, but
describe it. We'll come up. Brian or I or Ashley.
I would masturbate a lot as a child, not knowing what it was doing.
Yeah.
And I can't. And there's a word for it, and I can't pinpoint it. So that was a part of it. And then, you know, it manifested in like any friendships that I had with boys or anything. I always felt like there had to be that sexual tone to it. And that was very confusing. So it manifested a lot in confusion. And then later as I got older, it was like a disconnect from the safety within being in a woman's body.
Hey.
And I just was like, if I were only a boy, you know, if I were a boy, or if I were not in this body, something, so I probably left my body during, and then it contributed to the putting others first part. You know, I wanted this attention from this person.
Yep.
And the only way to get it was through this. You know, like I wanted kindness. So I guess this is how there was a second half to your question. What happened? Like, when did I realize or come out of it?
Yeah, when did you become aware of the damage so that you could lean into repairing it?
In my relation. Okay, so I've been married once before. In my previous marriage, I was starting to pick up that I was not satisfied. There's something missing. And I started to pay attention to that. And then once we became intimate, I started realizing, oh, he's actually, you know, affectionate to me, even when we're not flirty and preparing for sex. You know, there's that intimacy all over the place. It's consistent. And then it was just during my relationship with him and his love and his kindness and his safety that he provided in return, and his vulnerability about talking about his trauma and his stuff, that gave my mind permission to start unwinding to me, even to myself. And then I would start sharing with him. So having that safety, giving myself permission through observing him, was really what happened for me. And then recognizing that I deserve autonomy, that just because I exist, I deserve autonomy. And you helped me see that as well. And I was like, I gotta start speaking up to it. I gotta start respecting myself. I gotta do that. That was just the next step.
Yeah.
So that was it.
Thank you both for your just beautiful model of how you supported each other through these periods of time. It's truly beautiful to watch, even the words that you both use in describing your own situations and each other's. There's so much love and so much connection that exists between the two of you, and it's really cool. It's felt through the screen. So
we didn't even ask them, how did your paths cross? How did you find each other?
There is an app, a euchre app called Carmen Euchre, K-A-R-M-A. I shouldn't advertise for them, but anyway.
We're not.
You ever heard of the card game euchre? No. It's a Midwestern game.
Okay.
She was from the South, and I was originally from Michigan. I was living in LA at the time, and I had played for a couple of years before I even realized there was a little lobby where you wait for the games to start and you can chat. And some people just went there and didn't even play a game. They would just chat. I went in, and there was the usual, I tried to create a little bit of depth in the conversation, but there was the usual surfacey kind of chatting that you would expect to find in an app like that. Not her. And I asked her a question, and she gave me a kind of surfacey answer. And I remember feeling disappointed. And she went away for a while. I didn't see her for, I don't know, weeks, 2 weeks.
It bugged me. I was like, wow, I'm lying to myself about what. It like started to unravel stuff. And I'm like, I got to give this guy the real answer.
So when I saw her the next time, a couple of weeks later, she gave me this long answer. I was separated from my wife at the time. I remember I was in the bathtub looking at them like, wow, what is this? You know, I was like, the words were glowing on the page. So that was the beginning of it.
Do you remember the question you asked her?
It was about her relationship, her previous relationship, but I don't.
It's also remember. About my mom. Something about my mom.
Something about your mom. To be honest with you, I don't remember, and I don't know if I have it saved, Brian.
But you know what? What it sounds like is that it wasn't a surface level question, because you caused her to pause and think and feel which is powerful, right? And instinct, right, goes to protection, right? Especially when we're not used to being seen, when we don't feel safe actually having our truth out in the world, right? Armor up. It's like, here's surface level answer. I'm going to give you what you write, and I'll disappear. But I love that you went inward and came full circle back. That's really beautiful.
Man.
Yeah, it was a question that was kind of like, how did you know to ask a question that would shake my entire perfectly built structure of protection? And
yeah. Marshall seems like he has that ability, by the way, to ask questions that just cut right to the bone. I recognize it.
Because you have it too. That's why you see it in me, 'cause you have it too. But I didn't want anything from her other than the truth. And I don't know if that had anything to do with it either. Like, I couldn't even see you on the app. There was like a little picture of your arm. I didn't know what was going on.
No, there was something about your words as well. When I would see you in the chat, I would see your words and I would be like, who's that? That sounds like a good conversation right there. I wanted to be involved. I wanted to be a part of what you were participating in. Didn't you have like a dream or something of finding your person in the world and waking them up with questions?
Yes, I did, as a matter of fact. I remember that too. And I think that's why let me tell you guys. First of all, when I sat there in the bathtub looking at that, she's right. I did have this, it came back to me that I had the idea that I would ask the person I was meant to be with the right series of questions, and they would open up like in all those bank robbery movies. In addition, I started to, there were characteristics that I realized happened with me and her being, sharing energy just through the internet, through this little chat thing. And I wrote down the things that I experienced, and I Googled them, and up comes the words twin flame. And I had never heard those words in my life, but it was clear to me just by me identifying, well, I feel this, I notice this. This is a person that was that completed me, as Jerry Maguire said.
That's amazing. I love that. You guys both describe yourself as HSPs. What does that mean? Is that like an actual formal term? Is that something you've come up with? I'd not heard that before. So define HSPs for us, and then help us understand how you both identified with it.
It's it stands for highly HSP sensitive person, highly sensitive person. Psychologists bill it as a gift nowadays. Yeah. But when we were little, and depends on where you grow up,
right.
Everybody's environment is different. It was a painful thing to be very reliant on my senses. It was brutal. I was sent to my room when I was not in a good mood, and I couldn't come out till I was in a good mood. And I remember learning how to fake a smile. And I remember my little bookshelf when I was a little kid thinking, this is going to get you in a lot of trouble. You're going to have to remember how to undo this one day. I remember saying to myself, you're a little kid, you don't know the idea of psychological disorders. I remember thinking to myself, be careful now, but
I had moments like that too. I'll deal with this when I'm older. For now, I need it. I remember that. But
yeah,
we'll be in rooms or something, and you can pick up on a shift in somebody's mood just by just by being in the same room as them.
Yep.
And a lot of people can call that being an empath or the hyper aware. Is that what it was?
Intuitive. There's a bunch of terms for it.
There's a lot of terms for it, yeah.
And memory can be recalled through senses too.
Yes.
You could remember a beautiful day because of the breeze hitting your.
Yep.
And it might have been just any ordinary beautiful day, but you remember the breeze hitting your skin.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to be wrapping up here on time relatively soon, so I wanted to make sure that if you had other questions, you got a chance to jump in, because I can have a tendency to just take over.
We're just going to need to do a part 2 is all. So,
I like that very much.
Okay.
Let's master the balloons before we do that.
We'll master those reactions.
do a whole show.
Yeah. I want to go down a couple of really interesting quick paths, almost in kind of a rapid fire sense as we kind of bring this to a close. I I just want to say thank you, Marshall, because holy shit, the hot and ready Little Caesars pizza was from you? You got to give me some insight on that.
I would be honored to. It was one of the seminal moments, the thing I'm most known for. It happened to be this product that they were testing, and no franchisee wanted to do it because it would mean you'd have to throw out your waste products at the end of the day. You couldn't give it away. What if you got sued? There's all this stuff, and we had a very limited budget. But based on there were certainly other people involved, but they were my clients. I was the creative person. I had a creative director who came up with a great idea for it too. But they closed several hundred stores the year that I started doing this stuff for them. And the product, as I always like to say, because I do some marketing for a personal growth app called Ngomu, and I'm also a brand consultant. If you have a unique selling proposition, a USP, that means there's somebody looking for your product. You're the highest quality, you're the greatest convenience, or you're the lowest price, right? Well, in the case of Little Caesars, it had two. And throughout my life, if you notice things with two USPs, for example, Little Caesars was the best value in America 5 years in a row, and it was ready when you walk in. So they own convenience and they own price. If you look at Apple owned quality and they owned convenience. It was the easiest easy computer to use. And I can go through also. Netflix beat Blockbuster. Convenience, and it was only $1 a disc. So when you own two, you're gold. So I did it.
You did it again. So, you just had gold, and all of a sudden the balloons went off. That must be.
Yeah. So it took off. 12 straight years of record sales, and it's because it meets a pain point in the consumer. You're driving home, you don't know what to buy, and you're like, oh, I can stop in there, and I don't have to wait in line. I can still get home in time. The kids will be happy.
Yeah,
that kind of.
I can't tell you how many hot and ready Little Caesars pizzas I got when I was in college, and so I'm just going to say thank you, because those $5 hot and ready pizzas back then were just lifesavers as a college student on a budget.
In all seriousness, Brian, I was doing it for people like you. Money has never been my motivator. Maybe it needs to be more of one, but I would sit in my office and think to myself, I've been remote for over 20 years, and I would think to myself, there are people out there, a $5 pizza is going to feed them, going to feed their family. That's you're really helping, so that was how I would pump.
I think it's awesome. That's great. As we kind of bring this a little bit to a close, I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about Shit to Grit and what people can expect and where they can find it, because I love the title, and knowing in the short few interactions we've had, your ability to bring out depth, I can't wait to go listen to the show myself. And I'd also like you to give us a little bit of an understanding on this app that you're not only a recognized life coach, but the chief marketing officer for. Give us some insight so that our guests have access to you and all of your brilliance.
I'd love to do that, and I'll send you my link tree if you feel like putting it in the show notes.
We'll put it in the show notes. Yep.
Shit to Grit is a podcast I do with my longtime friend, David, who's also a very sensitive human being. And I told him when we started it, I'll tell you what it's about, but I said warmth, wisdom, and wit in that order. Now, we've been longtime fans of a football team called the Detroit Lions, and they have been bad for decades and decades and decades. And I've been watching them the past couple of years, and I said, oh my goodness, they turned it around. And I said to David, I think we talked about it even the season before when they had a 500 season, but I said, we need to start this podcast. And so we started, it's a conversation about conversations. And so if we leave off somewhere and we listen back to the episode, we'll pick up where we left off the next episode.
That's awesome.
It's really cool. And Heather's joined, and she has a segment called
Intentional Grounding.
Intentional Grounding, where if we get a lot of control, she grounds us. So we do a lot of funny stuff, completion percentages. How complete are you with that conversation? So we have little moments like that. And we try to find the emotional side of sports. I remember when I was little watching the miserable Lions and feeling the misery. I remember this guy for the Chicago Bears. I think they were 0-4, 0-5, and they won a game. And this big behemoth of a human being knelt down on the ground. The camera was right in his face, just absolutely unabashedly weeping. I'm like, wow, this is an emotional game.
Yeah.
So I love football for the emotions of it. So that's that. And please listen. It's anywhere you can find podcasts.
I'll totally listen. And it sounds like fun. So if you ever have any outside guests and you just want another person to riff with, that sounds like a blast. Yeah. And I'd love to come.
Yeah. I'll keep in mind. That would be cool. And Ngomu is a phenomenal, let me tell you, I talked about 2 USPs. Ngomu is the best value in personal coaching because thanks to this technology that the founders developed, you can get upwards of between 30 and 50 coaches at any given time that you can interact with. So I like to say it's like a cure for loneliness too. Interactive personal coaching on a variety of subjects in the categories of what life, soul, wellness, and career for less than $1 a day. I think it's $29.99 a month. So it's the best value and it's the most convenient because all you have to do is open up this app. There's the coaches. They're ready. It's on demand or it's live streaming. So I just couldn't be more excited about about the possibilities of this app. And
it sounds really exciting.
We're working with a venture capital company on the business to business side, and then we're going to hit the consumer side real hard.
I love that.
And he has a community, a Truth Empowered Relationship community on there.
I coach Truth Empowered Relationships twice a month. Yes.
That's amazing. I love that. Thank you for sharing both of those. I'm going to leave it a little bit open for the two of you. Do you have a closing thought for our audience, whether it's on intimacy, relationships, connection, whatever you want to speak to, either as individuals or together?
This is what I said about the litmus test. I'm thinking of, as you're talking, I went through, remember that scene in the Schwarzenegger movie where he's not someone's pounding on the bathroom door and he's like, he comes up with he chooses this, fuck you, asshole.
Yeah.
What moment, what things could I share? If, like the four of us have been talking about, I'm talking to your listeners, if you share yourself openly and vulnerably and someone puts you down for it, makes fun of you for it, uses it against you, etc., that's a litmus test. Do you really want to be in relationship with that person? Because I don't care if you're 20 or 70. Do you really want to waste a second or a minute of your time caving in, getting breadcrumbs versus an entire meal, right? Pretending that it's love? Do you really want to compromise yourself like that? There's no time to waste. Go for authentic love. Go for someone who wants you to be the most fully realized, well, I probably sound like Brian right now, the most fully realized person you can be. Don't waste time with pretenders. How about I'll say it like that? What about you?
What I want to say is once you realize yourself, once you start to acknowledge yourself and start to see yourself clearly, and you're like, I can't do all of this work. You've put so much of energy and focus and attention into creating all of these mazes, all of these defense mechanisms. You're capable of taking all of that energy you put into all of that and alchemizing it into what you really want, to that healthy communication, to that, healthy mindset, to loving yourself, to appreciate all of that good stuff. So you have all of the capability. It's there.
I think you both just dropped mics on that. And I also love the congruence of what you just said, because here's the truth, Marshall. You can't do what you suggested unless you have the ability to do it with yourself by breaking down your own walls. Because the problem most people suffer with is they're stuck in their own shame and blame cycle. And until they can bring that into a position to step out of, it doesn't matter what the outside world does. And It is so powerful and so clear the way the two of you complement each other. And it's been a gift to spend an hour with both of you. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure once again. And Ashley, it sounds like you're maybe newer to this partnership. It's a pleasure being with both of you. I want to make sure you hear that part. It's a pleasure being with both of you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, what a blast today, you guys.
And thank you for saying that, because pretty much everywhere she goes, whether she's in our community, whether she's in our coaching calls, whether she's at our transformational retreats, everyone keeps saying they want more Ashley. And so I've been preaching it for years, and I'm just giving her the space to step into wherever she wants to be. But it's definitely a part of the path. So thank you. And for those of you who tuned in today, Marshall and Heather jumped in. They flipped their lid. They scanned their cans. They talked about some of the trauma that caused them to be stuck, disconnected, and detached from themselves and many others for years. They also talked about how we can have truth-empowered relationships to really not only support each other, but grow into who we are. And what does that require? It requires you to have a sense of desire to be in your own truth. It requires you to have a desire to want to grow. And oh, by the way, the importance of unpacking everything that's keeping you stuck. It's going to require you, though, to flip open your lid and scan your can. What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com.